The afternoon sun streamed through the dusty windows of the classroom, casting a golden glow over the rows of worn desks. Mr. Allowode, wiry and full of energy, peppered his math lesson with jokes that sent ripples of laughter through the room. But for Teekay, the numbers on the board blurred into a haze. His mind wandered far beyond the classroom walls, to dreams of a future that felt both tantalizingly close and impossibly out of reach. The laughter around him faded into the background, replaced by the quiet hum of his own restless thoughts. Ms. Okoro stood at the front of the room, her voice steady and calm as she led the class through a discussion of Christopher Okigbo's poetry. The words on the page seemed to pulse with life, each line a meditation on identity and belonging. As students read aloud, Teekay tried to lose himself in the rhythm of the verses, but the theme struck too close to home. Belonging. What did that even mean? He felt tethered to Ajegunle by circumstance, yet his dreams carried him far beyond its borders. The poem's exploration of a fractured identity mirrored his own inner conflict, and he couldn't help but wonder, was he destined to remain stuck, or could he find a way to bridge the gap between his reality and his aspirations? Chinyere's gaze lingered on Teekay, her brow furrowed with concern. She wished she could read his mind to understand whether his distant look was about Amanda or something deeper, something she couldn't quite name. Her own thoughts twisted in a knot of longing and guilt. She respected his feelings, but a small, selfish part of her wondered if Amanda's absence might create space for her to connect with him in a way she hadn't dared before. Yet the thought felt cruel, and she quickly pushed it aside. How could she reach out without seeming like she was capitalizing on his pain? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as the class continued around her. As the bell rang, signaling the end of the period, Ms. Okoro's voice rose above the shuffle of chairs and rustling of papers. Your assignment, she announced, is to explore the theme of identity in Okigbo's poems and relate it to your personal experiences. Her gaze swept the room, lingering on Teekay for a moment longer than the others. It was as if she sensed the storm brewing within him, the unspoken words waiting to be set free. Let your personal insights shine through, she added, her tone both firm and encouraging. Teekay felt a flicker of something, excitement perhaps, or relief. Here was a chance to untangle the thoughts that had been swirling in his mind, to give voice to the questions that had no easy answers. The final bell echoed through the corridors, a signal for the school to empty. Students spilled out of classrooms, their laughter and chatter filling the air as they hurried toward buses, clubs, or the promise of home. Teekay took his time, carefully closing his literature textbook and tucking it into his backpack. When he looked up, Chinyere was there, waiting at his desk. She adjusted her prefect badge, a nervous habit he had come to recognize. "Teekay," she said softly, "can we walk together?" He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Her quiet support had become a constant in his life, a steady presence amidst the chaos. Together, they stepped into the bustling corridor, the noise of the school fading into the background as they began their walk home. The corridor was alive with movement, students rushing past in a blur of uniforms and laughter. Teekay and Chinyere walked side by side, their footsteps echoing in the emptying hallway. Outside, the courtyard was a burst of color and energy, a group of junior students practicing a dance routine for an upcoming cultural event. Their movements were fluid and full of life, a stark contrast to the heaviness Teekay carried in his chest. He paused for a moment, watching them spin and twist in perfect harmony. For a brief second, the weight lifted, replaced by a flicker of joy, but as quickly as it came, it was gone, and he turned back to Chinyere, the unspoken words between them hanging in the air. The late afternoon sun bathed the streets of Ajegunle in a warm golden light, casting long shadows over the mismatched rooftops. Street vendors had reappeared, their voices calling out to passersby as they roasted corn and peanuts over small fires. The smoky haze of cooking fires drifted through the air, mingling with the sounds of the bustling neighborhood. Teekay and Chinyere walked side by side, their steps slow and measured. The noise of the city seemed to swell and recede like a tide, a constant hum that both comforted and overwhelmed. Chinyere cleared her throat, breaking the silence. "Teekay," she began, her voice tentative, She paused, her courage faltering as she searched for the right words. Chinyere's voice wavered, the words catching in her throat. She looked at Teekay, her eyes searching his for a sign, anything that might tell her how he felt. "You know you're not alone, right?" she finally said, her voice steadying as she forced the words out. "I care about you as a friend, and I want you to be okay." The admission hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. For a moment, TK's expression softened, and she wondered if he understood the depth of her feelings. But he simply nodded, his gratitude evident even as he remained guarded. "I appreciate that, Chinyere," he said quietly. "You've always been there for me, even before Amanda arrived." Her heart ached at the mention of Amanda, but she pushed the feeling aside, focusing instead on the small victory of having spoken her truth. They paused in front of a rickety stall, the vendor handing them sachets of water with a smile. Chinyere handed one to Teekay, her gesture small but meaningful. "Here," she said, her voice soft. "You look dehydrated." He smiled gratefully, tearing the corner of the sachet with his teeth and taking a long sip. The cool water was a welcome relief, and for a moment the weight of the day seemed to lift. "Thanks," he said, his voice warm with appreciation. "I needed that." They stood there for a moment, the noise of the city fading into the background as they shared a quiet, unspoken understanding. It was a small moment, but in its simplicity, it carried a depth of meaning that words could never fully capture. The living room was dimly lit, the single bulb casting a flickering glow over the worn furniture. TK's mother sat on the couch, her face etched with exhaustion, but brightening at the sight of her son. "Tunde, welcome," she greeted, her voice warm despite her weariness. "Food is in the kitchen. Warm it if you want." TK nodded, placing his bag in the corner before slipping into the cramped kitchen. The pot of jollof rice sat on the counter, its familiar aroma filling the small space. As he lit the burner to heat the food, his mind wandered, replaying the events of the day. The tension at school, the gossip, Chinyere's unwavering support, it all swirled together, a tangled web of thoughts and emotions. He dished a small portion of rice into a bowl, the simple act of preparing a meal grounding him, if only for a moment. The rickety dining table creaked under the weight of his notebook as Teekay sat down to write. The electric light overhead flickered, threatening to plunge him into darkness, but he pressed on, determined to capture the thoughts that had been swirling in his mind all day. At the top of the page he wrote his name, by Tunde Kayode. He paused, the pen hovering over the paper as he considered where to begin. The assignment asked him to connect Okigbo's poetry to his own experiences, and as he thought about Ajegunle, its chaos, its resilience, its contradictions, he felt the words begin to flow. He wrote about the sting of shame he sometimes felt over his worn uniform, the yearning for a quieter life that occasionally crept in. But he also wrote about the pride he felt in his community, the warmth of his neighbors, and the strength he drew from his family. The words came in a rush, a cathartic release of emotions he had been holding in for far too long. As he wrote, he felt a sense of clarity, as if the act of putting pen to paper was helping him make sense of the tangled web of his thoughts. Miles away, in the affluent neighborhood of Ikoyi, Amanda Henshaw sat in her spacious, air-conditioned bedroom, surrounded by unpacked boxes. The room was a stark contrast to the vibrant chaos of Ajegunle, its quiet elegance a reminder of the world she had been thrust back into. As she unpacked, her thoughts drifted to the friends she had left behind, to the laughter and camaraderie she had found in a place so different from her own. She missed it, missed him, more than she cared to admit. Her father's decision to pull her out of Ajegunle had been made with the best intentions, but it left her feeling displaced, torn between two worlds. She picked up a book of poetry, her fingers tracing the lines of Okigbo's words, and wondered if TK was thinking of her too. The distance between them felt vast, but in her heart, she held on to the hope that their paths might cross again, that the threads of their stories were not yet done weaving together. His thoughts. The night deepened, the hum of a neighbor's generator blending with the distant bark of a dog and the faint cry of a baby. TK sat in the living room, the glow of a kerosene lantern casting soft shadows on his face. He flipped through the pages of his essay, the words a testament to the journey he had begun to untangle. Writing hadn't solved everything, but it had given him a way to process his feelings, to make sense of the chaos. As he closed the notebook, a small but determined smile played on his lips. The future was uncertain, but he felt a flicker of hope, a sense that he was moving forward, even if the path ahead was unclear. He wondered if one day he would be able to share these pages with Amanda, to talk with her again about literature, music, and the complexities of life. For now, all he could do was hold on to hope, keep writing, and keep moving forward. Fate had a way of weaving lives together in unexpected patterns, and he trusted that the same force that had brought Amanda to Ajegunle would orchestrate their meeting again in another chapter of their ever-evolving stories.